A general strike is a strike action in which a substantial proportion of the total labor force in a city, region, or country participates. General strikes are characterized by the participation of workers in a multitude of workplaces and tend to involve entire communities. General strikes first occurred in the mid-19th century and have characterized many historically important strikes. An early predecessor of the general strike may have been the secessio plebis in the Roman Republic. In the Outline of History, H. G. Wells recorded the general strike of the plebeians. The plebeians seem to have invented the strike, which now makes its first appearance in history. Their first strike occurred because they saw with indignation their friends, who had often served the state bravely in the legions, thrown into chains and reduced to slavery at the demand of patrician creditors. Wells noted that patricians made a mean use of their political advantages to grow rich through the national conquests at the expense not only of the defeated enemy, but of the poorer plebeian. The plebeians, who were expected to obey the laws, but were not allowed to know the laws, were successful, winning the right to appeal any injustice to the General Assembly. In 450 BC, in a concession resulting from the rebellion of the plebeians, the laws of Rome were written for all to peruse. The general strike action only became a feature of the political landscape with the onset of the Industrial Revolution. For the first time in history, large numbers of people were members of the industrial working class. They lived in cities and exchanged their labor for payment. By the 1830s, when the Chartist movement was at its peak, a true and widespread workers' consciousness was beginning to awaken in England. The first theorist to formulate and popularize the idea of a general strike for the purpose of political reform was the radical pamphleteer William Benbow, closely involved with planning the attempted Blanketeers' protest march by Lancashire weavers in March 1817. He became an associate of William Cobbett and passed his time agitating the labouring classes at their trades meetings and club houses. On the 28th of January 1832, Benbow published a pamphlet entitled Grand National Holiday and Congress of the Productive Classes. Benbow began to advocate direct and even violent action for political reform. In particular, he advanced his idea for a national holiday and national convention. By this he meant an extended period of general strike by the working classes, which would be a sacred or holy action, during which time local committees would keep the peace and elect delegates to a national convention or congress, which would agree the future direction of the nation. The striking workers were to support themselves with savings and confiscated parish funds, and by demanding contributions from rich people. Benbow's idea of a grand national holiday was adopted by the Chartist Congress of 1839. Benbow, having spent time in Manchester during 1838-9 promoting the cause in his pamphlet. In 1842, the demands for fairer wages and conditions across many different industries finally exploded into the first modern general strike. After the second Chartist petition was presented to Parliament in April 1842 and rejected, the strike began in the coal mines of Staffordshire, England, and soon spread through Britain, affecting factories, mills in Lancashire and coal mines from Dundee to South Wales and Cornwall. Instead of being a spontaneous uprising of the mutinous masses, the strike was politically motivated and was driven by a hard-headed agenda to win concessions. Probably as much as half of the then industrial workforce were on strike at its peak, over 500,000 men. The local leadership marshaled a growing working-class tradition to politically organize their followers to mount an articulate challenge to the capitalist political establishment. The mass abandonment of plantations by black slaves and poor whites during the American Civil War has, controversially, been considered a general strike. In his classic history Black Reconstruction in America, W.E.B. Du Bois describes this mass abandonment in precisely these terms: transforming itself suddenly from a problem of abandoned plantations and slaves captured while being used by the enemy for military purposes. The movement became a general strike against the slave system on the part of all who could find opportunity. The trickling streams of fugitives swelled to a flood. Once begun, The general strike of black and white went madly and relentlessly on like some great saga. The next large-scale general strike took place over half a century later in Belgium, in an effort to force the government to grant universal suffrage to the people. However, there were periodical strikes throughout the 19th century that could loosely be considered as general strikes. In the United States, the Philadelphia General